You know, every generation of tech has its quiet hero, the company that wasn't supposed to make it. For Silicon Valley, that's AMD. It's the story of a survivor, a company that spent decades chasing Intel's shadow, mocked, underestimated, even written off, yet somehow, every time, it found a way to crawl back into relevance. And now, it's more than relevant. AMD sits at the center of gaming, AI, and cloud computing, the unsung engine driving half the world's digital heartbeat. Think about it. The console under your TV, the workstation editing your videos, even the servers behind ChatGPT, all might be whispering on silicon stamped with those three letters, AMD. It's not flashy like Nvidia, it's not dominant like Intel once was, but it's everywhere that matters. This is a company that's been bankrupt in everything but spirit. And then Lisa Su arrived an engineer first, a strategist second, a savior third. Under her, AMD learned to stop fighting the last war and start designing for the next one. It stopped copying Intel's monoliths and built the Ryzen and EPYC lines around modular chiplets, smaller, faster, cheaper to make, easier to scale. It's the kind of decision that looks obvious only in hindsight, the kind that turns a struggling manufacturer into a multi-billion-dollar force of nature. AMD doesn't just sell chips, it sells redemption. Every product is a declaration that innovation doesn't belong to the biggest spender, but to the one who adapts fastest. So tonight, we're diving deep into AMD's world, its strengths, its weaknesses, its new frontier in AI and data centers, and the threats that could still bring it down. Because in the war for the future of silicon, AMD isn't trying to be the loudest voice in the room. It's trying to be the one that lasts the longest. If you want to understand AMD's real strength, you have to start with humility, because it's the one company that turned humility into a competitive weapon. While the rest of the semiconductor industry was busy flexing dominance, AMD was busy learning. Every loss, every product delay, every market stumble became data. That humility, that almost obsessive self-correction is why AMD's innovation cycle is now one of the fastest in the world. The crown jewel of that innovation is the chiplet architecture, a design so elegant it changed the cost structure of computing itself. Instead of manufacturing one massive, failure-prone die like Intel, AMD slices its chips into smaller, more efficient pieces that can be mixed and matched. It's like building a supercar out of interchangeable engines. Lower yield loss, higher flexibility, faster time to market. It's not just clever engineering, it's strategic manufacturing discipline. And it's given AMD a huge advantage in scaling production across consumer, enterprise, and cloud. Then there's Lisa Su's leadership, which deserves more credit than any single technological breakthrough. She didn't just rebuild the balance sheet, she rebuilt belief. She turned AMD from a product company into a platform company. The kind that designs entire ecosystems, CPUs, GPUs, custom SoCs, all interconnected through coherent design language and shared roadmaps. That's why every new Ryzen or EPYC release doesn't feel like a one-off product anymore. It feels like a chapter in a long, continuous story. And behind that story sits the TSMC partnership. AMD doesn't manufacture its own chips, it lets the world's best foundry do it. In a way, that's genius. AMD avoids the crushing capital expense of running fabs, and instead channels resources into design and architecture. The result is agility, the ability to pivot faster than competitors who are still chained to their own plants. It's a leaner model, but in a world of supply shocks and wafer shortages, lean can mean life. AMD also has an uncanny sense for timing. Ryzen's launch hit just as Intel stagnated. EPYC landed when cloud providers needed energy efficiency. And the Radiant Instinct line, though often overshadowed, is slowly finding its niche in AI workloads, where open-source frameworks matter more than brand loyalty. Timing for AMD isn't luck, it's precision. But maybe its greatest strength is trust. Gamers trust Ryzen, enterprises trust EPYC, even hyperscalers, those faceless giants behind every click and stream, are betting their workloads on AMD silicon. That trust wasn't bought with marketing. It was earned, benchmark by benchmark, watt by watt. AMD's strength, then, isn't just in silicon, it's in culture. A mindset that refuses to accept that being smaller means being weaker. Because sometimes, being the underdog is the only way to stay hungry enough to win. For all its brilliance, AMD still walks with a limp, a reminder that every victory in silicon comes at a price. Beneath the polish of innovation lies a company constantly fighting against its own scale. AMD's first weakness is structural. It doesn't own the factories that produce its lifeblood. Every processor, every GPU, every next-generation wafer comes from TSMC, a company halfway across the world and already drowning in demand from Apple, Nvidia, and Qualcomm. That dependence gives AMD agility, yes, but it also means vulnerability. A single bottleneck in Taiwan, a single geopolitical tremor, and AMD's production schedule can shatter like glass. And then there's the budget gap, the eternal imbalance between AMD's resources and those of its rivals. Intel's R&D budget alone dwarfs AMD's entire operating income in some quarters. Nvidia can spend lavishly on AI software ecosystems while AMD scrambles to build developer tools from scratch. That lack of deep pockets makes every product cycle a high-wire act. AMD has to be right almost every time, because it can't afford to fail as often as the giants can. Another quiet weakness is brand perception. Among enthusiasts, AMD has respect. Among casual consumers, it still has baggage. For years, the market saw AMD as the cheaper alternative, the budget option, good enough, but not best. Even now, as Ryzen and EPYC dominate benchmarks, that old image lingers in retail shelves and corporate procurement mindsets. Intel still wins contracts by reputation alone, especially in enterprise deals where conservatism rules. And though AMD's hardware often matches or even surpasses Nvidia's, its software ecosystem still trails behind. Nvidia's CUDA remains the gold standard in AI acceleration, while AMD's ROCm framework feels fragmented, underdocumented, and inaccessible to many developers. In a world where AI is software first and hardware second, that gap could become fatal if not closed soon. Then there's the fragmentation risk within AMD's own portfolio. It's building CPUs, GPUs, console chips, and AI accelerators all at once. That's impressive diversification, but it also spreads resources thin. A stumble in one segment, say, slow adoption of Radiant Instinct, or delays in next-gen EPYC shipments can ripple across the company's balance sheet, eroding investor confidence overnight. Finally, AMD's Achilles heel is its lack of vertical integration. Unlike Apple or Intel, it doesn't control the full stack. It can't dictate the end-user experience or optimize hardware-software synergy at the system level. That leaves it perpetually one step removed from the consumer, a component supplier rather than a platform owner. In the end, AMD's weaknesses are the same forces that make it compelling. It's smaller, hungrier, and perpetually on the edge of risk. But in a business where margins are razor thin and competition is measured in nanometers, even the hungriest fighter can tire. Every few decades, the semiconductor world resets itself. A new era begins, new markets open, and new architectures rise from the ashes of the old. Right now, AMD stands at one of those rare crossroads, and the opportunities in front of it are enormous. The first and loudest is artificial intelligence. Nvidia may own the stage, but AMD is quietly assembling the backstage. Its MI300 series accelerators are more than just GPUs. They're hybrid compute engines designed to merge CPU and GPU workloads into a single unified architecture. That's exactly where AI training and inference are headed toward integration, not separation. If AMD can convince hyperscalers and cloud providers to adopt its open software ecosystem, ROCm, over Nvidia's closed CUDA fortress, it could tap into one of the largest market expansions in tech history. Even a 10% share of that space could mean tens of billions in annual revenue. Then there's custom silicon, an arena where AMD is already a quiet titan. Every time someone picks up a PlayStation or an Xbox, they're using an AMD chip. That model high-volume, long-cycle contracts gives AMD stability that many of its competitors lack. And now, as automakers, robotics firms, and even defense contractors start demanding tailored compute solutions, AMD's expertise in semi-custom design could spill into entirely new verticals. The company could easily become the go-to partner for bespoke performance chips in industries far beyond gaming. Another massive opportunity lies in data centers and edge computing. The cloud revolution made processors anonymous. Nobody cares whose chip runs their server, only how efficient it is. AMD's EPYC processors already lead on performance per watt, and as power costs dominate data center economics, efficiency becomes more than a selling point, it becomes survival. With new generations like Turin and Genoa already stacking up to Intel's best, AMD could entrench itself as the preferred chip supplier for hyperscale. And then there's the AI PC revolution, the next great refresh cycle. As Microsoft, Dell, and Lenovo push laptops and desktops with neural processors and AI co-pilots baked in, AMD's integrated APU strategy, combining graphics and compute in one die, gives it a natural edge. That's not a new idea for AMD, it's their origin story. They built their identity around hybrid chips before the world cared. Now, the world finally does. We also can't ignore geopolitical tailwinds. Western governments are desperate to diversify supply chains and reduce dependence on Chinese manufacturing. AMD, with its US headquarters and deep ties to TSMC, sits right at the heart of that realignment. Every new subsidy, every CHIPS Act incentive, every government-backed fabrication expansion indirectly strengthens AMD's hand. And beyond all of this, there's something harder to quantify. Momentum. Investor confidence is high, partnerships are deepening, and the narrative has shifted. AMD is no longer the comeback story, it's the contender. That psychological shift opens doors in boardrooms and funding rounds that used to be closed. The next decade could see AMD evolve from a responsive company, reacting to what Intel or Nvidia does, into a defining force, setting its own cadence for the entire industry. The kind of company that others have to chase. But opportunity only matters if you can hold on to it, and in this industry, that's never guaranteed. Every empire of silicon eventually meets the same enemy: physics, capital, or time. For AMD, all three are waiting. The company sits in an uneasy equilibrium. Too successful to be ignored, too dependent to feel safe. Its first and greatest threat is geopolitical fragility. Taiwan isn't just a supplier, it's the heart of AMD's existence. If TSMC sneezes, AMD catches pneumonia. The semiconductor supply chain is a spider's web stretched over the Pacific, one typhoon, one cyber attack, one blockade, and production halts. For a fabless company, that's not just a disruption, it's paralysis. And AMD knows it. It's racing to diversify its manufacturing pipeline through TSMC's new Arizona fabs and other Western foundries, but those are still years away from volume production. Until then, it lives and dies by TSMC's capacity, and TSMC, in turn, lives under the shadow of regional instability. The second threat comes from Nvidia, a company that has transformed from a graphics chip maker into the face of artificial intelligence. Nvidia doesn't just sell hardware, it sells the ecosystem. CUDA, cuDNN, TensorRT, these are software moats so deep that AMD can't simply engineer its way across them. Developers have spent years optimizing for Nvidia. Switching isn't just hard, it's risky. Unless AMD can make ROCm truly accessible, it will remain the alternative, not the standard. Then there's Intel, newly revived and desperate. Its foundry ambitions, combined with government backing through the CHIPS Act, could swing the pendulum back in its favor. Intel's strategy is to own both design and manufacturing, using subsidies and strategic nationalism to rebuild relevance. If Intel succeeds in retaking process leadership, AMD's fabless advantage could shrink overnight. A subtler threat comes from market saturation. The PC boom that defined AMD's Ryzen success has softened. Consumers upgrade slower, margins tighten, and enterprise buyers, once AMD's great frontier, are cautious in a high-interest rate world. Even the data center market is cyclical. Cloud providers overbuy in good years and freeze procurement in bad ones. AMD's growth engine could stall simply because the world pauses to digest. And hovering over everything is the risk of commoditization. When performance differences narrow, chips become interchangeable, bought purely on price, not innovation. AMD's modular design gives it cost advantages, but it also invites imitation. Smaller fabless startups using open architectures like RISC-V could start eating at the low end of the market, while giants dominate the high. Finally, the human factor. AMD's renaissance was built around Lisa Su's vision, discipline, and technical authority. Succession planning at companies like this is rarely smooth. If leadership transitions without the same clarity of strategy, or if talent is drained by poaching from Nvidia or Apple, AMD could lose the very culture that made it resilient. The truth is, AMD lives in a permanent state of tension between agility and exposure, innovation and dependence. That's what makes it fascinating, but it's also what keeps investors awake at night. Because one wrong step in design, supply, or leadership could send it sliding back into the shadows it fought so hard to escape. There's a line that fits AMD perfectly. You don't have to be the biggest engine to move the world, just the one that never stops running. AMD's story is not about dominance. It's about persistence. It survived the impossible years when Intel had everything, when Nvidia owned the narrative, when investors stopped believing there was even room for a third voice in computing. Yet, out of that chaos, it built something rare in tech. Credibility. Real, measurable, benchmarked credibility. It isn't flawless, it's fragile, exposed, and sometimes one bad wafer batch away from a crisis. But that's also what makes it so human. AMD's rise under Lisa Su proves that leadership can still matter, that a company can win not through monopoly, but through focus. While competitors chase hype cycles, AMD keeps showing up generation after generation, quietly building the backbone of the digital world. The next decade will decide everything. AI workloads, chip sovereignty, and energy efficiency will redraw the map of computing, and AMD stands in the middle of that tectonic shift. If it can bridge the software gap, expand beyond TSMC, and keep its culture intact, it could graduate from contender to cornerstone, one of those rare names that define the fabric of modern technology. But if it falters, the world will not wait. Intel will resurge, Nvidia will evolve, startups will swarm. The same speed that made AMD's comeback possible could make its decline just as quick. For now, though, it stands as proof that second chances exist in the semiconductor world. And maybe that's the deeper lesson here. Resilience scales. Thanks for listening to TechEyeSpy, where we don't just talk about companies, we study the pulse of technology itself. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe, share, and check out our Substack for full written SWOTs and global sector breakdowns. Next week, we'll be looking at another giant of the tech and science investing frontier, and trust me, this one changes the game in a very different way.